if you're brand new to Flutterflow, you're just getting to grips with it, or even you've been using it for a while, these 10 tips are going to help you make the most of the platform and become a Flutterflow master in no time at all. So tip number 1, just build. Don't worry about courses, just dive in and start building things. Build a project that you're interested in, and that's the quickest way to learn. Obviously you can't break anything. Find a project that you're interested in, set it up, just drag some widgets into your project, play around with the properties and just click things and see what happens. That's the best way to learn. So that is tip number 1. Just go out and build stuff. Tip number 2, use branches. So you'll have a main branch, and that's the one that you're generally building in to start off with. And then if you go in here and create a commit, that will commit your current project in its existing status at that point. Give it a name, and then you commit your main branch. You can see it's got main up there, and then you can then create new branches once you've got a commit, or work on your other branches that you've got going, and then you'll see there that changes the branch. And what that does then, it does not alter your main branch. So if you want to make some changes on an app that you've got functions, so you've got an app functioning to a certain place, but you want to make some changes and try out some new things and things that are going to break, do a branch, and then your functioning app is obviously safe, and then you can then close the branch if it doesn't work out, or you can merge it back into the main, or indeed turn this one into the main by merging into it. This is custom calendar I've been building, and I branched out from the main app to create that particular element of it. So there's something I've been working on, and branches is definitely the way forward. So tip number 2, use branches, and it'll make your life A, easier, B, it keeps you more organised, and C, if things go wrong, you've always got your main branch you can go back to and start again. So tip number 2, use branches. Tip number 3, read the docs. Flutterflow, particularly their docs, are really good. I find most of what you want to do, they run through it. Sometimes it's a bit in a basic way and you have to expand on it a bit, but they do go through all the elements you're going to need to create what you want to do. So read the docs. When I say read the docs, I don't just mean the Flutterflow docs. You might get some use out of the Flutter docs, especially if you're using custom actions and custom widgets and anything to do with custom code. The Flutter docs are also very extensive and really helpful when building those elements out. And then if you're using Superbase, the Superbase docs again are excellent. They do have a really good YouTube channel as well with stuff on. Again, you may have to build upon what they show on the YouTube channel, but their docs are really thorough and most of what you need is in there. And likewise, Firebase. I'm not a Firebase user, certainly in terms of the database. I've used it obviously for things like Firebase cloud messaging, but read the docs. If you've got a question, it's going to be in the docs. So that's tip number 3. When you get stuck on something, just go into Flutterflow docs, and whatever widget you're trying to work with, whatever sort of data type you're trying to import or whatever, Flutterflow will almost certainly have something in the docs relating to it. So that is tip number 3, read the docs. Tip number 4, the Flutterflow community. Whatever problem you've come across, almost certainly somebody will have come across it as well. You do a search within the community, that question will have been asked, and you can get things like custom code snippets and that kind of thing. If somebody's already asked that and somebody's answered it, go to the community, you can post. You do often get a response, though not always. I've found in the past, if I have posted on the odd occasion, that you don't always get a response, but there's plenty of questions that have been answered on there, and whatever you're struggling with, somebody will have answered it. And in addition to that, if you're a Reddit user, the Flutterflow community on Reddit is excellent. I find I go in there, I use it reasonably regularly. I post answers if I know them, and I think a lot of people do. So the Flutterflow community on Reddit, if you're a Reddit user, join that. post a question, somebody will almost certainly answer it. And again, if you use a search function, then whatever problem you've come across undoubtedly it's already been posted before. So use communities. So tip number 4, use the communities, and by that I'm referring to the Flutterflow community and the Reddit one. I'm sure there are others on things like Discord which you can join, but find those out, join them. But communities are excellent. I find the Flutterflow community to be really helpful, so use the communities. And if you referring back to tip 1, you're building a project and you're getting stuck, which you will if you're new to this, the communities will help you out and get you on your way. Tip number 5, add social sign-in. Whether it's logging with Google, logging with Apple, depending on what sort of app you're building, whether it's just a web app or whatever, or it's an iOS app, whatever it is you're building, adding social login is anecdotally better for sign-ups, just by information I've seen online and sort of founders and people that build apps and bootstrappers and everything else saying, oh yeah, many more people signing with Google than any other platform. I think it's a trust thing rather than just by straight email and password. So if you want to increase your conversions and your sign-ups, I would thoroughly recommend adding login with Google and Apple and whatever social auth provider you may feel appropriate for your app. It may be that GitHub could be useful depending on what you're building, whatever it may be. Add social login because users trust that in terms of authentication and things like confirming users' email and everything else. It's already done for you by the auth provider, so it's kind of a double win on that front. So I would thoroughly recommend adding login with Google or any other auth providers to your apps. Number 6, test on devices. So this tip number 6, this is Android Studio, and you can see I've got a Motorola Android phone of some description there plugged in. It's a physical device. I always download apps I built to that and have a play with them, make sure they work. You can have a number of virtual devices obviously, but it's nice to do it on a physical one. And likewise with Apple, you can do it in test flight. So you can have test flight on your phone via your Apple developer account and put your apps on your device that way. Alternatively, if you have a Mac, you can have Xcode installed and you can plug a physical device into that and load your apps up that way. Definitely the best way of doing it. Obviously building web apps is different. You can just publish them to the web and that way you go. Also that works with progressive web apps. If you've got a mobile version that's progressive web app, publish to the web and away you go. But obviously some of the functionality you want to use, maybe with access to contacts or photos or to location, may not be available on the web versions. My tip number 6, test your apps on physical devices if at all possible, because that's what it's going to look like to your users rather than on any virtual device. Tip number 7, know what UI is going to look like before you get too far. So if you've got an idea you want for your app and you want how your UI to look, get that as kind of sketched out or built roughly or whatever before you add too much functionality. Make sure it's what you want, because if you start adding actions to buttons and custom actions and all the rest of it, and then you find you want to change UI, then you've got to change all your logic as well. So if you've got a button, for instance, with quite a few actions on, like this one, then you decide you didn't want to use that button, you wanted something else. Obviously, you can copy and paste the actions and go back to using branches as well. So that's another important thing to remember. If you want to change UI, maybe do it in a branch first to see how you go. But if you get your UI somewhere near where you'd like it to be before you get too far, then you can have less headaches changing the important stuff in the background that makes your app work. So get an idea of it before you build too much, and it will save yourself a lot of grief down the line when you want to start changing things. So tip number 7, learn and understand what you want UI to do before you get too far. Tip number 8, use libraries in Flutterflow. So you can export a project as a library and then you can then import it into other Flutterflow projects to use the widgets, etc. that are within that project. So, for instance, my custom map widgets, I can import this project as a library into any of my other projects where I want to use custom maps, and then I haven't got to sort of rebuild them every time, just import them and they're available to use. And that'd be the same if you're, for instance, using a custom calendar, which I'm in the process of building as well. Anything you want to build and you want to export it as a library, you can then import it in future projects and it'll be available to them. It's a great way to save time, make your app building much more efficient. So tip number 8, use the Flutterflow libraries functionality. Tip number 9, standardize your naming conventions. It's going to save you no end of headaches and confusion down the line, especially if you're dealing with columns in tables, etc., on your back end. So Flutterflow tends to force us into camel case. I tend to use camel case within Flutterflow, and then I tend to use snake case in Supabase. And snake case is basically where you've got that format, where camel case is that format there. So we've got lowercase for the first word and then capitals for the beginning of each subsequent word. I tend to use camel case in Flutterflow and snake case in Supabase. So obviously I'm still in Flutterflow, but this is just a commented out database function within this app, and you can see there we've got snake case for our column values. Keep it standard and stick to it, because it's going to make your life so much easier and much less confusing if you mix them up and sometimes have user ID in one app or in one table where you've got it camel case and another table where you've got it just all lowercase, or you've got it snake case, whatever it is. You just get yourself really confused. Trust me, I've been there. So pick standard and stick with it, and you will save yourself an awful lot of grief down the road when you're starting to debug stuff. So that is tip number 9, standardize your naming conventions. Okay, and finally tip number 10, learn some code. So Flutterflow is a fantastic no-code builder, but more of a low-code builder. So there's certain things you are going to be restricted on if you rely purely on the inbuilt widgets. At some point, you're going to want to do something that Flutterflow cannot do out of the box, and means you're going to have to build it yourself. And this way you need to learn to code. Do you need to learn all the syntax and how to build it? No, you do not. Obviously, you can use ChatGPT or you can use Claude or whatever, and they're very good at doing that, but they do hallucinate. They do make mistakes, and the longer the conversation goes on, the worse it gets. So you definitely need to know what you're looking at for it to get the most out of those things. And in addition to that, when you're trying to debug your code, you definitely need to understand what it is you're looking for to fix the errors that are in it, rather than just asking it to find errors and fix them, although it can do it sometimes. So learning some code will get you a long way in terms of getting the most out of these platforms. And with Flutterflow, one of the less trumpeted aspects is that you can download your code and you can connect it to a GitHub repo if you're in the higher plan, or there is of course the VS Code extension that you can use, so you can pull your code from your project and work on it inside VS Code. So the point of that is you're not actually tied to the platform. So the code is yours, you can download it, you can do whatever you want with it. Some of these other no-code platforms, you cannot do that. So with Flutterflow, you're not tied. You can download your code and deploy it manually, whatever you want to do. So learning to code obviously is going to benefit you if that's a path you want to go down. And here we have some Flutter code, which is for getting days of the week and dates for custom action. Again, got some Postgres code here for getting the email status of a user, and that's a database function. They're not particularly complicated, so they're quite easy to learn. So you just need to learn the basics so you can pick your way through it if you need to. I thoroughly recommend it because you get much more out of Flutterflow, and if you're using Supabase as a backend or whatever else you're using, if you know some code, even in terms of knowing what to ask the AI and how to fix it when it gets it wrong, rather than just typing it all out yourself. And if you do want to learn and you want to get it from the AI, that's fine. But I recommend retyping it. Don't just copy and paste it. So if you're got the AI to create a function or something for you, don't just copy and paste it. I know it's the easiest thing to do and it's very tempting, but if you retype it, you're going to be learning much more about the syntax and you're going to learn more about how to fix when it goes wrong. So that is tip number 10, learn some code. I thoroughly recommend it. I've put it last because I know there's a lot of people that probably won't want to do that, because why use no code tools in the first place? I get the argument, but I thoroughly recommend it. You can get much more out of the platform if you do. And those are my 10 tips for getting the most out of Flutterflow. Hopefully you're already using all of those. If not, I thoroughly recommend you look into them. There is some videos linked down below for some of them that I've covered. Some of them I have, some I haven't. So you can follow up for more information on those. So hopefully that was of use and you can learn from that and apply it to your projects. And I will speak to you in the next video.